Okay. Now, the next step on this program is for me to introduce my two cohorts. Um, we have, as the frame of this picture is, we have Phyllis next to me, my immediate right. I think I got that half straight. And to her right, we have Dorothy Zellner. I have known these women for over 60 years. That movie really just moved me. I'm sorry. In any case, I'm introducing them because they were there. You hear a lot about the movement from people who were never there, wouldn't even think about being there, ran in an opposite direction, so forth and so on. I will tell you, we didn't think we were doing anything special. We thought we were doing what was right, and that's different. So I'm going to start off because each of us is going to tell you about our experience in an encapsulated version. So I'm going to start. I think I asked Dottie to lead us off, to be followed by Phyllis, and then I will bring up the rear. So thank you. Dottie?
Hey, hi, everybody. Uh, just to tell you, really, the littlest I possibly can get away with about myself, because I find that so utterly boring. But I'm a native New Yorker. I'm a red diaper baby, what they call a red diaper baby, the child of leftists. I'm a first generation American. Um, I get very weepy too, by the way. Phyllis, Muriel, don't worry about this. This is age, I think. So to make a very long story short, I did go south. I worked in Atlanta. I worked in Danville, Virginia. I ran the SNCC office in Boston. I spent the summer of 1964 in Mississippi, and so did Muriel, and so did Phyllis. But I thought it would be useful to give you a little background about voting rights. When I got to Atlanta, I was not yet working for SNCC, and it was the summer of 1961. I was 23. And SNCC was actually going through an internal struggle between the people who wanted to do public accommodations and those who wanted to do voting rights. And the public accommodations had been a huge success. And I later wrote a paper about it for the organization I was working with then. And I estimated that easily 50 to 75,000 people had been involved in the first year and a half in 100 cities in the South, and had actually desegregated many public facilities. It was an extremely effective movement, especially in places like Nashville, Tennessee. But the backdrop to this is that when Bob Moses went to Mississippi, Miss Baker, Ella Baker, gave him names of people that she knew. And he asked people like, he went to Amzie Moore's house. Amzie was in Cleveland, I believe, Cleveland, Mississippi. And he had been a World War II vet, and he had come back having fought for democracy. And of course, you know what he came back to was anybody who tried to do anything was, met the consequences, including death. And Bob Moses said to him, do you want to do public accommodations? Do you want to do demonstrations about sitting in? And Amzie, apparently, I've heard this story through several people. He said no, and he unrolled a precinct map and laid it out on the table, a map of that district, and showed where the potential voters were. And he said, this is what we want. This is what is going to mean something to us and give us some power. So it was the people themselves, the people on the ground, who said they wanted to register to vote. So let us flash forward to now, 60 years later, and guess what? We're fighting over the right to vote again. And 60 years ago, I, knowing very little, I said, oh, poo-poo to voting rights. So what is that? It's all out on the streets and the demonstrations, that's going to win over everything. But the people who were actually suffering, they knew the difference. They knew that having the vote was was having some degree of power. I'm not saying all power, because in addition to voting, you have to vote for somebody, you have to vote for, you have people to vote for, but the people themselves risked, as you see in this very nice movie, they risked everything. So here we go, 60 years later. I can't even call the right wing, I can't even use the word right wing anymore. I just use the word what I think they are, they're fascists. And what you saw these people in Selma describing was a fascist country that they were in, where they had absolutely no rights except the right to work. And that's what they were there for, was to work. And now the new fascists are coming up, and guess what? They know the problem is voting again. They know something, we better know something. So to me, this whole struggle has been our pushing back on this right wing, on these fascists. And sometimes they get ahead of us and sometimes we get ahead of them. And coming up, the next couple of years are going to be unbelievably critical. I hope I'm alive to see this, because I'm ready to volunteer my services again and go to Georgia again. And I'm going to contact people down there and say, do you want us to come? Do you want people to come? And I would say to people, if you missed it the first time in 1964, now's your chance. And if they still have those laws on the books where you go to jail for giving water to people who are standing there for hours, I want to be one of them. That's what I want to say.
I'm muting. I'm sorry. I'm not so professional about all of this. Thank you, Dottie. That was wonderful. Now, Phyllis, we come to you. Unmute yourself. Okay.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Okay, I grew up in Winona, Minnesota on the Mississippi River. Went after I graduated from college to Chicago to work. I was working as a community health nurse, and I was also involved in some fundraising for SNCC, because I had friends that I was working with who were friends with people who were actually down in Mississippi working on the front lines for SNCC. And when 1964 came along and there was a question about asking people to come down to work on voter registration, I went. My intent was to work in voter registration, but when I saw the conditions that people lived in and how poor the health conditions were, health services were down there, people also recognizing that I was a nurse, they wanted me to work on the health issues. However, I was involved in voter registration in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which had really gone through a lot of registering people to vote, and was successful in registering a few people. But lawyers came down and took depositions from people who were refused registration. And what they found out was that if people in the community knew who you were and accompanied the lawyers, they would share the information. And so I accompanied the lawyers very often in terms of taking depositions from people who were either assaulted or brutalized when they were trying to vote and weren't able to register to vote. I also got very involved in teaching health classes, and the people in the community had health and welfare groups that they were working with and struggling with, but they found out, I mean, these are just some of the sides. People were put off if they were on getting help from the city, they were refused help from the city if they belonged to these health and welfare groups. But these were groups of local people who were working to try to solve their own health and welfare problems. And I would act as a consultant for them, and was able to get some help from the North in sending people who were refused medical care, to send them north to get the medical care to Detroit mostly, and sometimes to Chicago, and sometimes to New York City. Anyway, to make a long story bearable, I was in Mississippi when the first Selma to Montgomery march happened. And I actually was involved in teaching a health education course down in Gulfport, Mississippi. And I got the call to get over to Selma right away. And so I did go over to, oh, by the way, the medical committee for human rights discovered me down there in the late fall of '64 and asked if I would please be on their staff. And I said, well, my primary, I primarily wanted to work with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, but since what you're asking me to do is the very same thing, and you would give me a car, which would make me more mobile and able to do more work and would afford mobility for the people working on our SNCC project, I took on, I went with Medical Committee for Human Rights too. That's why I was asked to come over to the Selma to Montgomery March after Bloody Sunday. Then there was a second march, which the film really didn't go much into, but it was really Turnaround Sunday, the following Sunday. Turnaround Sunday, is that a sign, Muriel, to be quiet? No? Okay, that Turnaround Sunday, and that was when Reverend Reeb was killed. And then I stayed in Selma the entire time and did the Selma to Montgomery March and basically rode up and down in a medical committee van, picking up people who couldn't make it, and stayed in the tents on the night. Every night we stayed in tents, and we were busy bandaging feet and serving, taking care of people who were sick or needed some help. And was there through the Selma to Montgomery March. And after the march, SNCC asked me to come to Selma, said, no, we want you in Selma, not in Mississippi. So I worked in Selma and worked in the Lowndes County and many of the counties that the SNCC people were working in. And I think one of the important things too that I was involved in was collecting letters and information from people who were not getting health care, and that was being sent by the Medical Committee for Human Rights to Washington, D.C. And actually, President Johnson used that data to get the Medicare bill passed. And now we're in a situation where Medicare is being privatized and people will not get the type of care that they're getting on regular Medicare. So, it's, as Dottie said, it's just another area, another age of fascism in the country. And anyway, I'm open for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Phyllis. Now I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about my experience. I will tell you, I joined the movement when I was about 17. I was at Howard. And I had come from a family where at least my grandmother and grandfather were activists, and no questions about that. And when I had my first exposure to Stokely Carmichael at a meeting where he was extolling the fact that there would be a demonstration the very next day, and our eyes locked, because I guess I looked at him in disbelief, and he said, and you're going to be in charge of communications. And I said, I don't know a thing about communications. He said, don't worry, by tomorrow morning, you will know everything you need to know. And after the meeting, I went to his apartment, which was basically NAG Central. Now, NAG being the Nonviolent Action Group. We were there 24/7. I mean, it is a large apartment in a building that had seen better days. And at any point in time, there would be anywhere between 10 and 40 people in there. We were always meeting. We were constantly in session. We were determined to fight this thing. And I have to say, we were really, I mean, when I think about the level of organization that we put together just on our sheer instinct, and what I'm seeing today, it's the difference between day and night. In any case, I joined NAG, and NAG was engaged in issues that had to do with construction. It had to do with tenants' rights. I discovered in Washington, D.C., tenants had no rights on the books at all. We initiated rent strikes, and people thought well, who are these people? And then we dressed differently and we looked differently. And actually, we took on the academics at Howard, at least that was my experience. No longer were we accepting, or I'll put it this way, we weren't drinking the Kool-Aid. If you were coming up with something that we thought was both, what's the word, unclear, untrue, then if there was a sick person or a nag person in your class, you were in trouble. And I will have to say that I did take several courses with Carmichael because he and I were both Soch majors. And we had Nathan Hare, who you might know, who was the founder of a magazine, who of course was the name of the magazine has just left my thinking, but it was a wonderful magazine, and it had to do with, of course, looking at Black people and their lives and functioning in the society. And I remember one day Dr. Hare was sitting in front of the woman, the class was called Population, and he was giving some analysis, and Carmichael basically said, "Oh no, this will never do." He said, so Dr. Hare, well, he wasn't really put off by it. He said, well, what is your comment? So Carmichael proceeded, and I can't tell you word for word what he said, but he proceeded with an analysis that was quite different from the academic analysis that that Dr. Hare was giving. So Dr. Hare said, would you like to come up and give the lecture? Carmichael said, don't mind if I do. And he went to the front of the class and he gave us a lecture that would, well, it went down in our own personal histories. I will put it like that. But not only that, Dr. Hare said this was an awakening for him. He had never looked at things the way this young man was looking at them. And he had to wrestle with that. And Nathan Hare became, in his own right, a person of note, of progressive academic and professional thought. Now, fast forward, we were going to all go to Mississippi. Now, why were we all going to Mississippi? Because Carmichael, who was our fearless, we used to call him fearless leader, who was our fearless leader, said that we were going, that the SNCC had called for a major set of activities to occur in Mississippi in 1964. I was pretty much out of the SNCC interaction. I just knew that come graduation, approximately 3 days later, we were going to go to Mississippi. Thank God somebody had thought that we needed orientation, because I will tell you, we would have been shocked into the 21st century had we not had somebody to tell us, do you know what you're getting into? And do you know what Mississippi is like? And the short answer was, no, we didn't. We were full of, what's the word, expectation. And we thought that actually our government was just making mistakes. We didn't realize that it was deliberate, intentional. We thought that, well, if we point out the way for you to do better, you're going to do better because you're an intelligent operation. You're a democratic operation, of course, and you would be embarrassed publicly for people to know that you were fascistic. And thank you, Dorothy, for putting that word out there, because that's exactly what it is. They can either be fascistic or insane. Both of them work together, as you probably know, if you know a little bit of history. So anyway, for a week, we were at Oxford and we were getting these stories. And I will never forget something that we were in a circle and people were sitting on the floor and somebody was giving their experience. And somebody else said, could this possibly be true? And Bob Moses said, and I'll never forget it, he says, Mississippi needs no exaggeration. With that, I said, oh my God, we are getting ready to go into the bowels of this country. And truly, we were. We left Oxford, Ohio, went into Mississippi, dropped off in the dead of night. I don't know whether that was expected or not, but in the dead of night, and we were dropped off silently. When we hit the Mississippi state line, all the singing, all the talk just stopped. It was automatic, and we were in dead silence. And people were dropped off at pre-arranged locations. I didn't know any of those details. I was not that kind of organizer at the time. And then I got dropped off at Greenville, which was on the river. You know, we could look across, well, I think this is a slight exaggeration. We could look across the river to Arkansas. the sister state. There's actually not much difference between Arkansas and Mississippi, just sort of the name of the state. In any case, I was made ultimately a director of 3 counties. Now, being named a director in SNCC, it's not your ordinary idea of what a director is. That just means that you're responsible for all the work. And you had to kick people in the you know where if they weren't functioning properly. You had to report to the Atlanta office on a daily basis. First of all, they wanted to know if you were still alive. That was a very important thing. And whether the people that were working with you were still alive. And I will tell you, in Mississippi, we were always counting bodies. There was never a day when we were calling in. It was not necessarily one of our people, when I say our people, associated with our organization, but it was a Black person and it was in Mississippi and it was death under very questionable circumstances. I worked in the counties. I worked in the county, Essequibo County, which was a founded Black county in the post-Civil War period. There were 3 Black people registered to vote in a county that was controlled by white people who came over actually from Arkansas and controlled the power station. Okay, so you begin to get some idea, this stuff is interlaced. None of this stuff is running as they taught us in school as a singular package. These are all interrelated, mutually supportive operations to keep Black people in a very precarious and permanently impoverished condition. Well, that awakening, we did freedom schools, we did a number of things, very small location. Myersville, which was the county seat, was 50 people if you count the chickens and some of the white people who came in the day and left at night. All right, now see, census gets to be real cute because the census people come in the day and they take certain information, but there's a whole leaving of people at the nighttime. So it's very interesting, these Southern statistics. And as you probably know, Thomas Jefferson initiated the whole American census process. And unfortunately, that's all we have to go on, because Black people had no birth certificates. They hardly had death certificates. So moving forward, I went then from those 3 counties into Jackson and tried to help state operations. I will tell you, I wanted to let you know, and we could talk about certain kinds of details at another point or later on today, but I wanted to tell you that SNCC was more than just voting. As I indicated, voting doesn't stay in one place. You get voting, you get health, you get food insecurities, you get criminality. And I really do mean the criminality of whites against Blacks. I'm being very specific. One of the things that haunts me to this day was a man who came to me and asked me if I could help him in a case where 5 young white men had jumped on him and beaten him to the point that he could hardly walk. And this was some years prior to him even coming to my attention. I had no resources for him. I had none. And he was not the only person that I ran into who was the recipient of just wanton, random, crazy violence. All right, but having said that, let me just begin to sort of close up. NAG, we were interested in municipal services, but we shared the office with the Black lung people who came out of West Virginia, who were literally white Appalachians who were looking to the Congress for some relief for Black lung. Black lung continues to this day to haunt the cold valleys and hills of this country, particularly Appalachia. Okay. Then I want you to also, I made some notes over here about other things. I will tell you that we work with Cesar Chavez. I personally sent 2 of our best organizers to work with Cesar Chavez. We got an emergency call. You may remember the grape strike, and people were getting run over by trucks. I mean, these people don't care about you, and they don't care about your children either. And so we got a call. I was in the at a major event for us because we were getting ready to send people off to Atlantic City, and somebody said, "We need some help." I pointed to 2 young white guys, big guys. I said, "Get ready, because you're on your way." I told Chavez you'd be there, and that was how we functioned. The movement was a movement. Do you understand what I'm saying? So then I wanted to say, otherwise, we were also very concerned about the war in Vietnam. The first public protest against the war in Vietnam was a busload of Mississippians that Bob Moses had put on this bus and sent to the Justice Department of Washington, D.C. to tell the world, we are tired of you drafting our men for your pseudo wars about some pseudo democracy. This is just not right. Now, at that time, you know that the draft was very heavily pulling on the Black community. That's a whole nother story. We had that story at another point. And I also wanted you to know that some of our people initiated the first White House conference on disabilities. So when you tell me, you know, when people talk about civil rights, they try to put this in a narrow frame. No, we were looking at America and trying to help get it straight. I will stop here because you know I will go on and on. If you have some other questions, please ask me. And thank you for this opportunity to present at least some parts of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to you. Thank you.